the most important person of the day, Professor Lekha Chakraborty. Over to you, Lekha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my privilege and honor to be the part of this panel. And thank you so much for inviting me. A special thanks to Professor Joseph. And, it's a nostalgic moment for me because I worked with, Govinda around 10 years. And I traveled with him to many countries, including Morocco, two major cities in Morocco, Rabat and Casablanca, to Paris, and to, Philippines, not only to Manila, but we have taken a ship, a flight and a bus. I think in one day, through all the modes of transport, we traveled to a commune in Philippines. And in all these journeys, I have closely watched the way he conducted the meetings at all the tiers of government, and the way he has, moved the policy prescriptions at the local level, whether it is regarding a pork barrel funds or whether it is regarding identifying the needs at local level. It was a learning experience for me. And, the biggest takeaway is when you have budget constraints at the local level, what is a kind of fiscal flexibility you can apply at the local level? That was the beautiful learning experience when I traveled with him in all these countries. And that project, was related to gender-aware human development as well. So within this masculine perspectives of public finance, how can the soft sectors like gender can be integrated in the public finance? It was a learning experience for me when I traveled with him to all these cities, communes, rural and urban. Thank you so much, sir. And I also remember the way we walked after our dinner and the way you have listened to my emotional issues regarding professional or personal, and also the kind of confusions I had and the way you have consoled me. And everything is very much there in my mind. And thank you so much for this book. It's an important contribution, not only for the students and academia, but for the public policy makers. You have begun in our institute an important program for the senior IAS officers on fiscal policy and macroeconomic management. And Panu has been the course director in the preliminary year. Then I have taken it over and ran that program for 7 years. And in that program, every policy maker, across country, when they came for the program, they looked for a document like this, what you have produced right now, a document which can they readily refer to regarding the theories, regarding the empirics and the data analysis and the policy prescriptions. So that journey, you have given beautifully in this book. And thank you so much for, writing down this book. But certain gaps or certain beautiful discussions you had with us in an IPFP, those discussions, maybe it's another book for you to write regarding the decentralization. And you sent me to the International Institute of Public Finance Conference. There I met Professor Musgrave. I was talking about the fiscal decentralization to him, and especially the kind of planning process that's happening, in the context of Kerala. Then Musgrave, he shrewdly mentioned that fiscal decentralization is a rightist process. So I was arguing with him regarding what has happened in my own home state, Kerala. But he was telling that in this market-oriented decentralization process, it's becoming a rightist process. So, these kinds of exposure you have given me by sending me to various forums. Right now, when I became the part of that organization, I humbly remember the way you have guided me to come up to this position as a member of the governing board of IIPF. And in the book, my co-panelists have focused on many aspects, and I don't want to revisit many of them, and they have preempted also many of the questions I have for you. But I would love to highlight certain points, like Professor Isaac pointed out, what's the relevance of the institutional reforms like fiscal council right now, because we are now grappling with very high fiscal deficit and high public debt. And the consolation is that we are keeping the fiscal policy accommodative in the time of pandemic and in the time of geopolitical uncertainties. But as we go along, we need to find a medium-term fiscal consolidation path. So what it could be, like we will go back to a suffocating 3% in the future, or even including the budget transparency issues by including the off-budget liabilities. Are we going to settle down to a ratio of 4.5? So these are the concerns I have. Or can we substantiate that? Let there be high fiscal deficit or high debt, but use it for reducing the output cap and also for enhancing the public expenditure in infrastructure, because infrastructure crowd in private investment. And in this area, our finance minister also repeatedly pointed out that if it is used for capital infrastructure, let there be high fiscal deficit, don't fear deficit. But at the same time, there is a tendency now in our country to nudge the subnational governments to go ahead in the market to find their fiscal space. But that was not the case so far. So in your book, I was trying to identify what's a solution for this, because earlier, macroeconomic stabilization was the function of center government. But now the macroeconomic uncertainties, the states are equally exposed to. And given the hard budget constraints at the state level, what is the solution for that? When the center government, not just the state governments, to go ahead with facing the market uncertainties and to find their fiscal space. At the same time, we have the threshold 3%, that rule like it's a sword in front of us. So I'm little confused about the statement whether we can boldly say that fiscal deficit is good or deficit is good, not only in the times of pandemic or geopolitical uncertainties, but if you can substantiate the use of deficit, then can we, get away with the threshold ratios of deficit, which is suffocating the fiscal space at the center and the state governments. And, Dr. Professor D. Narayana mentioned about Albert Breton. And I do remember our discussions about Albert Breton and how he has influenced your thought process and the way you had very healthy debates with him on the competitive federalism and cooperative federalism. And I do remember learning from you the kind of Salmon mechanisms, the Peary Salmon mechanisms you talked about. But in the contemporary Indian economy, in the contemporary Indian public finance, I would love to hear from you the kind of application of the Salmon mechanisms, whether we can benchmark certain jurisdictions or certain best practices and work towards that, or the kind of cooperative federalism mostly we are managing through the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And I do also remember the kind of debate we had regarding financing human development issues, whether it can be a part of intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And you were very vocal in saying that don't play around with unconditional grants by integrating human development criteria in the formula-based fiscal transfers, but you can go ahead with conditional transfers. But with the climate change as a part of, the TOR of the finance commissions, we have gone ahead with incorporating, climate change as a mandate or as a part of unconditional transfers. So I would love to hear the evolution in your thought process regarding complicating, that's a word you use, don't complicate the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. It has to be based on offsetting fiscal disabilities, but not more than that. The primary objective of the IGFT is to offset fiscal disabilities. We cannot complicate that further with climate change. But, having said that, I also remember your contributions in environmental federalism and, Wallace Oates influenced your thought process regarding, taking the fiscal federalism ahead to, environmental federalism. And I know that, I remember that you initiated that project in our institute on environmental federalism. And this year, India is going to produce the first, adaptation communication statement in November, because we have committed to the Glasgow commitments. Given that backdrop, would love to know about your perspectives about, the climate change commitments and what's the kind of fiscal instruments and the role of environmental federalism in tackling the climate change commitments. Because one clear answer, a transparent answer, is to start a climate responsive budgeting statement at the center government and the state levels as a long-term public financial management tool. But beyond that, what it could be, because we have committed to net zero carbon emissions, and we have committed to just transition. So I would love to hear your thoughts about the climate change in public finance, as well as the kind of these are the quick points I noted down from reading the book. And thank you so much for giving this book, and not only on the contemporary Indian public finance, but you have taken the theories and the data analysis and the policy prescriptions. It is meticulously done in each of the chapters, and I enjoyed reading that roving bandit and stationary bandit stories of Olson. You have told me in person. I remembered those stories, and thank you so much once again, and wish you all success and peace and happiness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lekha. Your tribute to your mentor could not have been better, and the appraisal of the book also, and the list of questions could not have been longer. Thank you very much. Now, I think we have to hear from the star of the day. May I invite Professor M. Govinda for his response. I think Professor Isaac Mashek, how long you can be here, because you are your flight at 6:30. Hello, Professor Isaac, how long will you be able to stay back with us?
5:15. I can listen. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Listen to him.
Okay. I think, yeah. I think it. Thank you. Now over to Professor Govinda.
Professor Isaac, Professor Srivastava, the directors of the three institutions, Joseph, Bhanumurthy, Kavita, and Shanmugam, Pinaki, Dr. Narayana, Dr. Jose, Lekha, and Dr. All the invitees. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been associated with this institute for long. In fact, even before it became Gulat Institute.
Yes.
Yes. Recently,
Yes.
Joseph called some Thanu Pillai, who used to be, who is in Thanu Pillai, spoke to me, because at that time he wanted some guidance, and at that time he had come to NIPFP. I was a professor. I used to help him around that time. Now, first of all, let me apologize. My profound apologies. You've been very kind and generous in the praise for the book, but there are a large number of editorial problems. Now, you expect Oxford University Press to do a good job, but then they didn't do a good job. They have already, the book is coming for the second print. The book has been exhausted, first print has been exhausted. It's coming for the second print, and I have made somewhere about 250 corrections. And and it's already, in fact, this morning I replied to the editor. Say editing is done in London. So I replied to the editor saying that because of this, the change, there have been page changes in the index. So I had to make those corrections as well. Possibly this weekend I will send it back, and in another 15 days, the second print is likely to come. It is going to be printed there. So in the meantime, let me profusely apologize for torturing you with, it's an unkindest cut. if you want to say, because there are some sentences which are not complete. So, I mean, so anyway, whatever it is, but it gives the message, but then it needs to be cleaned up, which will be done very soon. You have all been very, very generous and kind.
People like Dinare and understand.
Yeah. People you have been very kind. See, after all, I did what others have done, and then maybe, my own thoughts. It's Bernard Shaw who said he is taller than Shakespeare because he's standing on his shoulders. Basically, so it's basically that to the extent that I understand, and I used that, and then wrote this book. Now, there are a number of issues. There are a number of controversial issues. In fact, the chapter begins, the book begins with the role of the state. If you really want to talk about the present discussion on freebies, you've got to go back and then understand what actually the state does is different from what it is. After all, state comes in where the markets fail in a capitalist economy. The market failure can be a variety of different types. There are, you have a pure public good. There are questions of externalities. Basically the Puggian type of externalities, where you may have to subsidize. Now, that cannot be considered as a freebie, because you think that there is social benefits are much larger than the private benefit, and therefore you want to do this thing. But then when you are doing subsidies, if there is this thing is the one of the important areas where the market fail is redistribution. Markets don't redistribute. So obviously redistribution is an important thing. Now the question here is whether you want to subsidize a commodity or whether you want to give a cash transfer. You subsidize, you don't give electricity, you don't charge for electricity. Punjab's electricity bill that is given up is 2.5% of GSDP. Now, the money that comes by way from everyone, that is not going to generate the rate of, return that would help in, setting off your, the burden of debt. So, I said so the basic issue that one talks about is the role of the state. And then, of course, there is a very clear case for redistribution, how you want to redistribute. But then there is also an issue, a major issue, which I just want to flag it here. Role of the state intervention does not mean everywhere the government has to spend. There is a huge role for regulation. In the process of, you think that you own it up, you control it, and therefore you don't need to regulate it. It is important to regulate, all the private sector to perform efficiently. If there has to be a proper competition in the market. So in the name of saying that, no, we don't want competition, so we will own it and we will run the thing. Government doesn't have the comparative advantage to do that. Government should really, and in the process, you ignore the entire regulation, and then that creates a whole lot of other problems. Anyway, I start with that. Now, given the shortage of time, Professor Thomas will have to go. I will have four issues that I want to flag. He referred to the issue of intergenerational equity, which is, and I in fact go through the old, explanation between Lerner and Buchanan. What is called the vulgar opinion of the classicals, and then new orthodoxy by the Keynesians. And then ultimately Buchanan comes to the conclusion that ultimately it is the vulgar opinion that is the correct opinion. But then even in the Buchanan's this thing, if a borrowing is done, the crucial thing that he brings about is an opportunity cost. When the government takes away the borrowing space and then makes this thing, there is an opportunity cost. Now, the intergenerational inequity will not be there, provided that money is used properly for generate the rate of return, which is adequate to, which will service the debt and then, help in the repayment of the debt. So the issue is very clear. But then, I mean, if you are borrowing, as I said, if you for giving all sorts of things, farm loan waiver or sort of power subsidy and this and that, that is not going to generate the rate of return. And obviously, your next generation will have to bear the burden of that. The pure and simple issue that flagged is here. Now, and again, this is not something which is a general proposition, but this, and there may be pandemic times. During pandemic times, obviously, some of these things you will have to appropriately adopt. But as a general part of the rule, one of the problems with the government, unlike the private sector, it doesn't perform, it goes bankrupt. Government doesn't go bankrupt. Somebody else will come and bail it out. And this no fear of bankruptcy doesn't really give sufficient incentive for them to be efficient. I'm not saying that this government or that government, I'm not even talking about this, even the center. Ultimately, it was in, it was the center at that time, in 2008, who did the farm loan waiver. Farm loan waiver, the expansion of national, this employment guarantee for the whole country, and pay commission recommendation. These are the three. Until then, your fiscal plan was going on well. These three things actually, in fact, we haven't recovered from that. So this is an issue not for the center versus state. And and then there was also some other question that came up in this thing. Actually, Lekha mentioned that. Redistribution and stabilization, if you look at the fiscal federalism, broadly, it's not exclusively, broadly a central function. Price, sort of control of prices, you have to have one, money supply authority. Controlling prices has to be done throughout the country. Employment, local problems will be there, but by and large, it has to be the responsibility of the central government. Now, so if that is the case, then it will have to basically look at overall situation and within the overall perspective that one has. Similarly, redistribution. Much of that is the reason why you have much of the expenditure comes from the local, because allocation is basically the subnational function. Redistribution, because the incentive problem. If you ask any state whether you want to redistribute, they would want all the capitalists to come into their place and not poor people. So basically you need, but then this is not exclusively a central function, because financing of redistribution, financing of poverty alleviation has to be done at the center, and the implementation has to be done at the subnational level, at the local level, because center doesn't know who the poor are. They don't know what what policies are relevant for a particular place in terms of alleviating poverty. So this has to be, that is the place. In fact, Rubenfeld basically writes in an article in Journal of Economic Perspective, it's a place where you have a cooperative federalism should be work where both have to work in unison. But anyway, I will not go further on that issue of intergenerational. I entirely agree with you. If borrowing leads to creation of assets, borrowing leads to additional income creation so that you can service the debt in the future, there is no intergeneration inequity, this thing. Now the Fiscal Council, whether it is a FRBM Act or any other thing, if the government has the political willingness, you don't need it. If the government doesn't have a political willingness, even if you have it, it won't work. But, so in that sense, it is neither necessary nor a sufficient condition. But it helps. Why it helps? In fact, if you go through the Constitution, there is a provision in the Constitution which says that the Parliament can actually put the restrictions on the amount of money that can be borrowed. You don't need an FRBM Act. I mean, in fact, it's been pointed out in the 14th Finance Commission's report. But then government never bothered about it. Parliament never cared for it. Similarly, FRBM limits also, Parliament doesn't care for it. They have been continuously violating, particularly at the center.
I think, sir, your answer to
it is over. I think we will continue.
No, no, I'll just, I'll quickly finish it. I'll finish it very quickly. But then, just as in the case of FRBM Act, Fiscal Council helps. Why? It's an independent council. It's like a congressional budget office in the US. Budget Office of Budget Accountability. Many other countries have parliamentary budget offices. Now, this has to be done. The FRBM Act has to be amended to create an independent council. Now, it's not a silver bullet, as I said, but at the same time, you have to be reporting every time that what are the three major things that I say there? One, budget estimates, the wrong things are done straight from the forecasting. The tax terrorism starts there. You estimate higher project higher revenues, give targets to the commissionerates. Those fellows, without really sort of caring about, just go about slapping the tax, income tax. And then if you go to the tribunal, you have to pay 20% of the tax upfront, and then you can work on the tribunal. 75% of the cases in the tribunal are decided in the favor of SSCs. 80% in the high courts are decided in favor of SSCs. And another 80% is decided in the favor of the Supreme Court. So which means that basically they have been doing this. This is one. Forecasting. Second thing, monitoring the fiscal progress as the thing goes on and reporting to the parliament and the press both. And so these are the third thing is, you know it well, sir. Every politician has a habit of making announcements. I will do this, I will do this, I will one rank, one pension, this, that, and 100 other things. I'm not talking about the state or this thing. It's a general issue. And nobody really works out what the total liability to the taxpayer is at the end of the day. And somebody has to do that. And the fiscal council should say, okay, if you have one rank, one pension, this is it. If this is the total amount of, this is a definition, this is the concept, and this is the total amount of money that you will have to spend. And so this, at least people will know that when an announcement is given, there is a commensurate cost involved in that. This is a minimalist thing. I mean, there are 15th Finance Commission has given much more. And the 13th Finance Commission started off saying that Finance Ministry will appoint an expert group which will convert itself into a fiscal council. I mean, a player cannot be an umpire. Finance Ministry appointing somebody and then that is becoming a fiscal council doesn't happen. It's not loose. The same thing was made, sort of in the FRBM review committee. And it is the 14th Finance Commission where I was the one who was vehemently argued that this is not meant for just the state or it. I mean, my thing was only for the center at that time. But because I was more concerned about the central profit getting, because that impacts the whole country. Now, of course, 15th Finance Commission has said both the things. That's the second issue that I want to have. And the third thing is, I mean, what is it that extra budgetary borrowing? Now, you see, at the end of the day, one has to keep a tab on what is really happening. As I said, the productive expenditures, there are ways of dealing with that, but then at least a total volume of what is a total stock of things has to be known, and it has to be published. And what if it is a contingent liability, it should be reported. That is necessary for macroeconomic stability. Nothing more than that, I would say.
I've absolutely no quarrel with you on that. But then it should be transparent. The states have to publish it along with the budget documents, and there should be open discussion on that. But in the center, you permit them to borrow outside your fiscal deficit. Now they want to put this into your fiscal deficit in Kerala.
Absolutely.
That's
the center should do it.
Yeah.
They have to do it first, because that is a much more
serious
serious issue.
You cannot say you can fix a date for future. This should be so, both for center and states. That's the problem. See, the asymmetry in dealing with the transactions of center and the state.
Actually, the liability from the contingent liability is the probability of, that liability not, probability, you should assign, multiply the thing with the probability that you will not be able to pay, and that you will.
See, though I would add one side, say this is an issue. There must be a federal discussion on this.
Absolutely.
What is off-budget borrowing? What is extra budgetary borrowing? What is the transactional public sector borrowing? It's so clear what it is all about. So you cannot arbitrarily take an action unilaterally.
Absolutely.
That's-
Absolutely. Yeah. And on this, I will also have another problem. This is last one I will take.
You have to honor this initial responsibility for you.
See,
No,
you
no,
must
all the-
excuse
all the
me.
conversion-
I cannot miss my flight.
No, please, these are all not necessary.
No. This is our pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Cake cutting. For
Cake
his
cutting.
birthday.
Oh.
Sir, ഒന്ന് announce ചെയ്തിരുന്നു online. I
Okay,
think
this-
people are waiting. 75.
So, in between the speech, reply, we are going to have a cake cutting ceremony.
Where is the night?
For Sanjeev's birthday, yeah.
ഇവിടെ തന്നെ ഉണ്ട് sir. തിരിച്ചു വെക്കണം. തിരിച്ചു വെക്കണം.
ഇങ്ങനെ.
തിരിച്ചാണ്.